The richest source of omega-3 on Earth is not salmon, it's not fish oil, it's not chia seeds, flax seeds, or anything you've seen on a supplement shelf. It's a plant. A plant whose seeds contain more omega-3 by weight than almost anything scientists have ever measured. A plant that grows aggressively, almost effortlessly, in multiple climates. A plant that, once introduced to the soil, doesn't just grow, it returns. Year after year, generation after generation, and yet, in America, this same plant is sprayed with herbicides and labeled a weed. Not ignored, erased. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this wasn't just a random mistake in agriculture. It wasn't just a gap in knowledge. Something happened. Something that removed not only the plant from the land, but the knowledge of how to use it from an entire culture. A knowledge system that had already been working for centuries. A system that didn't depend on industries, supply chains, or capsules. Just seeds. So the question isn't just, why haven't you heard about this plant? The real question is, who stopped you from hearing about it? Because in 1942, something happened that changed the fate of this plant in the West forever, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. On February 19, 1942, something happened in the United States that most people today barely think about, but its consequences are still quietly shaping your life. That day, Executive Order 9066 was signed, and within days, over 120,000 people received notices. They had less than a week to leave, not just their homes, their lives, farms, businesses, tools, seeds, everything they had built over decades, gone. Some sold their land for almost nothing, others simply walked away, leaving entire harvests behind. And among those farms were the gardens of Japanese-American families. Families who had been cultivating something very specific, not just crops, knowledge, for over 30 years on American soil. They had been growing a plant their ancestors trusted for food, for medicine, for oil. A plant their grandmothers understood deeply. A plant that didn't need factories, or distribution chains, or permission. And then, almost overnight, those families were removed. Their land was taken, their systems were interrupted, and the knowledge they carried didn't get passed on. Because knowledge like that isn't written in manuals. It lives in daily practice, in repetition, in seasons, in hands that plant, harvest, press, and cook. So when those families finally returned after the war, they weren't coming back to the same world. The markets had changed, the buyers were gone, and the culture that once understood that plant no longer recognized it, so it wasn't replanted. Not because it didn't work, not because it wasn't valuable, but because the chain of memory had been broken. And when knowledge disappears like that, it doesn't make noise, it just fades, quietly, until one day, generations later, you don't even know it ever existed. So what was this plant that quietly disappeared from American soil? It's called Perilla. In Japan, they call it shiso. In China, zisu. In Korea, kanip. In India, simply Perilla. Different names, same plant. A plant that for centuries wasn't treated as a supplement, but as a complete system. Because Perilla was never just something you add to your diet. It was something you built your life around. The leaves were eaten fresh, wrapped around food, added to soups. The seeds were pressed into oil, used daily in cooking, even for light before electricity existed. The plant itself was used as medicine, passed down through generations. Nothing was wasted, nothing was outsourced. And here's where it gets even more interesting. This wasn't a rare plant. It wasn't fragile. It didn't require perfect conditions or specialized care. It grew easily, aggressively even. Once planted, it didn't depend on you anymore. It adapted. It spread, it returned. Some farming communities documented the same Perilla patches growing in the same soil for generations, without replanting, without intervention. Think about that for a second. One decision, made by someone decades ago, could continue feeding people long after they were gone. Not because of technology, not because of industry, but because of a plant that understood how to sustain itself. And yet, despite all of this, despite its simplicity, its power, its history, most people in the West have never even heard its name. Not because it wasn't useful, but because the system that sustained it was never rebuilt. And while that knowledge faded here, something very different was happening on the other side of the world. Because this plant was never forgotten. While the West slowly forgot this plant, 500 million people never did. Across Japan, Korea, China, and parts of India, Perilla never disappeared. It never became a trend. It never needed to be rediscovered. Because it was always there, quietly integrated into daily life. In Japan, raw fish was often placed over Perilla leaves. Not for decoration, but because the plant naturally slowed bacterial growth, something chefs understood long before modern science confirmed it. In Korea, the leaves are still used every week, wrapped around grilled meat, fermented with garlic and soy, eaten as a staple, not a supplement. In China, traditional medicine has referenced this plant for over 1,000 years, describing its ability to support the lungs, calm the stomach, and purify the blood. This wasn't alternative knowledge, it was normal life. And that's the key difference. Because in the West, health became something you buy, a capsule, a bottle, a product. But in these cultures, health was something you grew, something you cooked, something you repeated, daily, without thinking. No branding, no dependency, just continuity. And here's where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Because while millions of people continued using this plant every single week, another system was quietly rising in the West. A system that would take one small part of what this plant offered, extract it, package it, and sell it back to you, as if it had been discovered for the first time. Somewhere along the way, you were taught something very specific, that if you want omega-3, you need fish, or capsules, or expensive seeds sold as superfoods. But here's what almost no one tells you. Perilla seed oil contains between 54% and 64% omega-3 by weight. Let that sink in. That's higher than flaxseed, higher than shea, and in many cases, even more concentrated than the fish oil capsules lining pharmacy shelves. So the question becomes unavoidable. If something this powerful exists, why isn't it everywhere? Why isn't it the standard recommendation? Because what matters isn't just how effective something is. It's how well it fits into a system. And Perilla doesn't fit. It doesn't require factories. It doesn't require complex extraction processes. It doesn't require global distribution. You can grow it, harvest it, and extract the oil yourself. In a single afternoon with a simple manual press, no middlemen, no recurring purchases. Now compare that to fish oil. It needs to be sourced from oceans, processed, refined, encapsulated, stored, transported in controlled conditions. Every step adding cost. Every step creating dependency. And then there's something even more important, balance. Because Omega-3 doesn't work in isolation. Your body depends on the ratio between omega-3 and omega-6. And modern diets, they've drifted dangerously out of balance. In some cases, reaching ratios close to 15:1, heavily skewed toward omega-6, a pattern researchers from institutions like Harvard Medical School have associated with increased inflammation and long-term cardiovascular risk. Now, here's where Perilla becomes even more interesting, because its oil doesn't just contain high omega-3. It has one of the most favorable omega-3 to omega-6 ratios ever recorded in a seed oil, around 6:1, in the right direction. Not something you have to fix later. Something that starts balanced, naturally. So again, if the goal is health, if the goal is efficiency, if the goal is simplicity, why were you never told about this? Because what you're looking at isn't just a nutritional choice, it's a system choice. And once you see the system, you start noticing something else. The information was never completely missing, it was just never fully translated. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, but if this plant is really that powerful, where's the science? And that's where things get interesting, because the research does exist, just not where you've been taught to look. In 1991, researchers at India's National Institute of Nutrition analyzed Perilla seed oil. What they found was clear, an exceptionally high concentration of alpha-linolenic acid, the exact Omega-3 your body needs. But the study didn't go viral. It didn't reach mainstream health conversations. It stayed inside scientific journals. Then in 2004, a clinical trial published in the Annals of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology followed patients with seasonal allergies. One group received Perilla extract. The result? Up to 50% reduction in symptoms. Not from a pharmaceutical drug, from a plant. In 2017, researchers in Korea observed something even more surprising. The omega-3s from Perilla oil was able to cross the blood-brain barrier, helping protect neurons from oxidative stress. Think about that. Not just supporting your body, but directly interacting with your brain. And in 2024, new research exploring neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's began pointing toward something even deeper. A connection between Perilla oil and the gut-brain axis. One of the most advanced frontiers in modern neuroscience. Meaning this plant may not just nourish you, it may influence how your brain and body communicate. So now the question becomes even more uncomfortable. If this research exists, why haven't you heard about it? Because most of these studies came from Asian research institutions, published in languages and journals that were historically under-indexed in major Western databases. For decades, this created a strange effect. The knowledge was real, the results were documented, but to the systems that guide mainstream recommendations, it was almost invisible. Not rejected, just overlooked. And when something is overlooked long enough, it starts to feel like it never existed. Meanwhile, something else was happening in parallel. A different narrative was being built. A different solution was being funded, studied, and promoted, at scale. While this plant remained quietly documented, but overlooked, another story was being written. In the 1970s, researchers studying Inuit populations in Greenland observed something unusual. Despite diets extremely high in fat, they showed significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease. The conclusion, omega-3 was the protective factor, and the source, fish. That single insight changed everything, because from that moment on, the narrative was set. Omega-3 equals fish equals health. And by the 1980s, an entire industry was born. Fish oil, processing plants, extraction technologies, encapsulation systems, global distribution chains. A system that could be scaled, a system that could be owned, a system that could generate billions. Today, fish oil dominates the global omega-3 market, and if you search scientific databases, you'll find over 15,000 studies on fish oil and omega-3. Now try searching for Perilla oil. You'll find a fraction of that, not because it doesn't work, but because research follows funding, and funding follows profit. Fish oil can be industrialized. It can be refined, branded, patented, distributed. Perilla can't. You can't patent a plant that grows on its own. You can't control seeds that reproduce freely. You can't build dependency around something people can produce themselves in their own backyard, and that changes the equation completely. Because if a family can grow their own omega-3 supply, harvest it, press it, and store it for months, what exactly are they buying? This isn't just about nutrition anymore. It's about control. Control of production, control of knowledge, control of access. And once a system like that is established, it doesn't disappear eyes. It reinforces itself through research, through recommendations, through repetition, until one solution becomes so dominant that everything else feels irrelevant, or worse, invisible. And while that system continued to grow, something much quieter was happening on the ground, because the plant itself never stopped growing. Here's where the story takes a strange turn, because the plant didn't disappear. It didn't go extinct. It didn't fail. It kept growing, quietly, relentlessly. After the war, after the farms were lost, after the knowledge faded, Perilla didn't wait to be replanted. It spread, along roadsides in disturbed soil, in empty lots, in places no one was paying attention to. It adapted to the environment, without permission, and eventually it was given a new label: not food, not medicine, a weed, an invasive species, something unwanted, something to be removed. Think about how powerful that shift is, because once something is labeled a weed, you don't question it, you don't study it, you don't eat it, you destroy it. And that's exactly what happened. Agricultural bulletins began listing it as a problem. Herbicide companies developed solutions specifically designed to eliminate it. Entire systems were built, not to understand the plant, but to erase it. And the irony. At the exact same time, hundreds of millions of people across Asia were still eating it every week, still cooking with it, still preserving it, still using it as medicine. Same plant. Two completely different realities. In one world, it's nourishment. In another, it's a nuisance. So now, you have to ask yourself, what actually changed? The plant, or the way people were taught to see it? Because once perception shifts, behavior follows. And when behavior changes across generations, knowledge disappears. Not because it wasn't useful, but because it was redefined. And while people were being taught to kill it, the plant kept doing what it has always done. Growing, waiting, returning. Despite everything, the plant never left. It was ignored. It was mislabeled. It was sprayed, removed, dismissed, and still, it kept coming back. Because Perilla doesn't behave like a fragile crop, it behaves like a system. A single plant can produce thousands of seeds, and those seeds don't just disappear after one season. They stay in the soil, dormant, waiting, for years. Some remain viable for 5 years, or more, meaning what looks like absence is often just timing, and when the conditions are right, it returns. Not planted, not managed, just returning. There are farming communities that have documented the same Perilla patches growing in the same soil for generations, without replanting, without intervention. Think about the implications of that. One action, taken once, can continue producing food, nutrients, and medicine, long after the person who planted it is gone. This isn't gardening. This is continuity. And maybe that's why it was never dependent on systems. Because it doesn't need them. It grows in poor soil. It tolerates drought. It adapts to different climates. It doesn't demand precision. It rewards presence. And once it's there, it becomes part of the environment. Not something you maintain, but something that maintains itself. So while industries built complex supply chains, while products became more processed, more packaged, more distant, this plant stayed simple, accessible, independent, and maybe that's the part that matters most. Because if something this powerful can exist, without needing permission, infrastructure, or constant purchasing, then the question shifts again. Not where do I buy it, but why was I never taught to grow it? Because once you understand that, everything changes. So now, you know, this plant exists, it's powerful, it's accessible, and it never really disappeared. The only question left is, what do you do with that knowledge? Because the truth is, growing it doesn't require expertise. It doesn't require perfect conditions. It doesn't require a system. It just requires a start. You take the seeds and soak them in water for about 24 hours. Then you place them on the soil, not buried. They need light to grow. Within 1 to 3 weeks, small shoots begin to appear. After that, you don't need to control it. You just let it adapt. Rain becomes enough. Sun becomes enough. Time becomes enough. And as it grows, you can begin to use it immediately. The leaves can be eaten fresh, added to meals, wrapped around food, or even dried into tea. Simple, direct, no processing needed. Then, at the end of the season, something even more powerful happens. The plant flowers, and those flowers turn into seeds. Thousands of them. You can collect them, or simply let them fall back into the soil, and next year, it returns. On its own, not as a product, but as a system. If you want oil, you let the seeds dry completely, then press them. Even a simple manual press can produce a golden oil that can last for months when stored properly. What you're creating isn't just a harvest. It's independence. It's continuity. It's a shift from consuming to cultivating. And maybe that's what this story was really about all along. Not just a plant, but a forgotten relationship between people and what sustains them. Because the families who once grew this didn't lose it because it failed. They lost it because they were removed from the land. The knowledge didn't disappear. It was interrupted. But the seeds were never imprisoned. They're still here, growing quietly, waiting to be recognized again. So if this changed the way you see the plants around you, if it made you question what you've been taught, then stay with us. Subscribe, because this is just one of many forgotten systems, hidden in plain sight. And the more you see, the more you realize how much has been right in front of you all along.